Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? Well, today I want to describe the beautiful crystalline structure that is combat in Lamentations of the Flame Princess and other OSR games. And of course, that's very tongue-in-cheek. It is not beautiful and crystalline. It is what it is. So I'm going to go through this. And as I'm going through the whole description, I'm going to mostly talk about Lamentations of the Flame Princess. I may talk about what another game does, briefly here and there. Probably not even by name. We're just saying some people do this or that or the other thing. And keep in mind here, at this point, we've decided that there's going to be some kind of encounter. You're not sure if they're going to fight or not, but all this role-playing junk, I'm assuming that you guys are doing that at this point. So this is what happens mechanically. What do you need to do? And I'm just going to do a little read-through. I'm not going to read the book, but just kind of talk about the various sections in this little chapter. First thing is determine surprise. If you don't have to do this unless you're not really sure if one side or another might be surprised. Maybe they stumbled upon each other. Nobody's going to surprise anybody if they're clunking around in like armor and have torches and all this kind of stuff. I'm talking about those situations where it might be plausible that one side might surprise the other, or either one might be surprised. In this case, the adventurers roll a d6. The bandits, we're going to keep calling them the bandits, I think, roll a d6. On a roll of 1 or 2, either side is surprised. They might both be surprised. Some creatures, some races, some classes surprise people more frequently. So they might surprise people on a 1 in 3 or 1 in 4. Depends on the bestiary or the class or the creature. And some classes and creatures and what have you are never surprised or surprised only on a roll of 1 in 6. So you have to keep note of that sort of thing. And of course, you can throw any kind of situational modifiers in there you want. So you determine whether or not somebody is surprised. And he mentions in this book, I don't think I've ever seen it anywhere else, that if somebody's actually preparing an ambush, okay, then they have a 1 in 4 chance of 4 and 6 chance of surprising these people. And of course, they're not going to be surprised. They're watching them, for crying out loud. And you can decide it's a really good, ambush. They've done really well. Up to you at that point. So you may have to determine surprise. What happens when a side is surprised? They don't get to act for a round. They don't get to attack. They can defend themselves, not with any kind of dexterity modifier. So their armor class may suffer. No positive dexterity modifier. Negative one still counts for some reason. But they're just unable to act for a second. Next thing you do is you might have to determine the distance of the encounter. In other words, like how close are these two parties to each other? If you don't know, you roll 3d6. That's the canon thing you do. Multiply that by 10, and so that's how many feet they are apart. So maybe you roll a 5. So they're 50 feet apart. That's the closest members of each. So you determine what kind of range we're talking about at this point. Then you might have to roll for reaction, and this is a 2d6 roll. In general, you'll know how the NPCs, the bandits, are going to react to these people. But sometimes you might not know. Sometimes it's just kind of that you're not really sure. So, and maybe the party, the really charismatic, hopefully a really charismatic member of the party is trying to talk to them, trying to parlay, trying to do something. You want to see how they react. So it's a 2d6 roll. You want to roll high if you're the party, because that's a good reaction. Rolling low, that's pretty bad. Roll 2 is hostile, immediately hostile. It used to be instantly attacks. So if you're not really sure as a game master, you do that. And this is one of those things where the charisma modifier is important. I actually have experience with this, relatively recently, where a party I had no idea what was going to happen. It was an encounter with bandits, believe it or not, and very charismatic member of the party came up with a really plausible thing to say. I was like, oh, maybe, it might work. It ended up working really well, and they ended up befriending, and it was a whole thing where they became in cahoots with these people. So you never know what's going to happen. Now you decide, all right, well, if it's going down, there's going to be a fight. So at this point, you roll initiative, all right? And if a lot of games have an initiative system, it works a little bit differently than you might expect. So generally, what you do, the canon thing to do, you can do either or, is you roll party initiative. That means our heroes roll a d6 and the bandits roll a d6. Highest roll goes first. You want initiative. This is done each round. It is not a cyclical initiative. Every round, you get to roll initiative again. So that means, yes, the people that acted last in the first round can act first in the second round. You don't know. This is only modified by something like dexterity modifiers. Should you use the second option, which is everybody rolls individual initiative. So every party member rolls a d6. Higher is better. You roll, act first, and every group of people in like our opposition. So let's say the bandits and the bandit leader and his first lieutenant. Maybe they get an extra die, or they get a separate die. So maybe they act faster. Maybe they act slower. And then everybody goes in order. You go 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And you act in that segment of the round. Now, rounds in Lamentations of the Flame Princess are 6 seconds long. It's kind of abstract. Bottom line is they're fast. There's other games where they might be as long as a minute. But in general, this is one of those games where it's a fast round. And it's really not a hard and fast time. At least for me, it's not. So just take it as it is. It's a fast round. At that point, if there's any kind of ties, you go by dexterity, not dexterity modifier, but let's say, the party ties, or, there's two people fighting each other. Say, one of our heroes is fighting the bandit leader. And all right, so now you tie, you both roll a 5. At that point, maybe our party member has a 16 dexterity. What does the bandit leader have? Well, you don't know. You roll 3d6 and you find out if you really need to. Or you can just assign it to him. But, if you want to be fair, I suppose, as a game master, you do that. At this point, there's a whole bunch of stuff you can do in one round. But let's go with the attacking first, because that's obviously the most common thing to do, is to try to kill somebody at that point. So what you're going to do is you're going to roll. You've run initiative. It's your turn. And you're going to roll a die and see whether or not you hit your opponent. So you roll a d20. You're one of the party members, or, whoever you might be. Let's make it fun. You're one of the party members. You roll your d20. You decide, I'm going to try to kill this guy with my sword. You narrate that you're going to try to kill him. The idea is you narrate your intention. This is me sticking my own opinion in here. Don't say I chop his head off. You narrate your intention. I try to hit him. You roll a d20. You see if you add any relevant modifiers you might have, and you see whether it's equal to or greater than their armor class, in which case you scored a hit. And if you look at the hit points video, you narrate that appropriately. Say our bandit leader has 30 hit points. He's just very skilled, so you may have done a hit. You roll damage die next. So say you roll a d8 for your sword, and you score 7 points of damage. Well, okay, probably didn't really wound him. He probably got out of the way at the last second. It was a scratch, but you hit him. You're knocking down his combat mojo. That's how I like to think of it at that point. By the way, going back to initiative for 1 second. One of the other ways, which Lamentations of the Flame Princess does not do, is that a lot of games did, like things like the old white box swords and wizardry, OD&D. A lot of the games have a system or optional system where there's a whole order of operations and combat. Where in initiative, first, and it depends on the game and the version, but it's like magic spells go first, and then missiles go first, and then melee goes first, and then move goes last. And sometimes it goes by, winner of initiative, magic, loser of initiative, magic, back and winner of initiative, missiles, loser of initiative, missiles. I can tell you that I played it once or twice that way, and most people never play it that way. Even if the game says you play it that way, everybody goes at that point. By the way, just to kind of interject here, you get to move a certain amount in a combat round, and it's 1/3 of your normal movement rate. Movement rate in Lamentations of the Flame Princess, and a lot of these games is expressed in something like, say, you might have a 90-foot movement rate, and that's per turn. It's 1/3 of your movement rate in a combat round, so you can move 30 feet in that case. You can actually move your full movement. You can charge, but you may take some penalties at that point. But in general, you can move around that much in a round. Now, there's not really a real order of when that happens in this game, and some games have it, but generally, the way it generally gets played is you move about that much, and it's sometime during the round. If you say, I want to go over there and attack this guy, or I attack this guy and then run over there, usually what happens is you move your movement in a round. And, so that's been my experience. That's the way it normally goes for the most part. Most of these things are very much theater of the mind. There's not a grid. We're not throwing miniatures down. Sometimes you might have a miniature and say, yeah, this represents my guy. Isn't it cool looking? And the goblin's here, my guy's here, but it's kind of very abstract. A lot of the ranges are very abstract. But I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, maybe, with the abstract ranges. So yeah, you do that. Either you hit or you don't hit. You score damage. You roll for damage, all right, and then the other guy goes, and that's what happens. You move, whatever else you're going to do in a round. You may cast a spell. In general, I'll get to casting a spell in a second. One of the other things, some of the weapons have some extra effects, and it's not really very complicated for the most part. Let me see. There's a couple things. It's Garrote. This game is a Garrote. It's pretty cool, actually. You can grapple somebody, and they'll take 1d6 per round. Something like a polearm. You can set it against a charge, which is really cool. You can attack from the second rank. It has a +1 bonus to hit opponents with an unadjusted AC of 16 or better, so pretty much chainmail or better. You have a rapier, and this suffers a -2 to penalty to hit opponents with an unadjusted AC of 15 or better. I don't know if that's a typo. I've always thought it should be 16 because chainmail, but that's leather and shield. That's the way it is in this game. Let's see. There's minor weapons, little daggers and clubs and whatnot. They suffer -2 penalty to hit opponents with an unadjusted armor class of 15 or better. And once again, that's leather shield. I'd probably make it 16 or better personally for chainmail. This is if you remember to do this, by the way. And let's see what other, okay, then there's the bows, crossbows and bows, that sort of thing. These all have ranges. And generally, you have a short range, a medium range, and a long range. And targets at medium range, you take a -2 penalty to hit them. Targets at long range and Lamentations, it's -4 to hit. A lot of other games, it's -5. Now, these ranges are in there. We've all looked at them. We've all tried to use them. And generally what happens is they're approximations. As a game master, and player says, well, how close am I in short range or medium range or long range? And you figure out. Very rarely do we actually sit there and measure, like, how far away are these guys. For the most part in these games, it's pretty much, we use approximations. It is not a grid. It is not a battle mat. You can play it that way if you really like to, knock yourself out. Just not my thing, and most people that I've ever played with never really play it that way. It's very much a theater of the mind sort of thing. Neat thing about crossbows and Lamentations of a Flame Princess is they take a long time to reload. I think you can only use a light crossbow once every 2 rounds and a heavy crossbow once every 3. But light crossbows ignore 2 points of armor, and heavy crossbows ignore 4. So they're the big guns in the game, as far as that sort of thing is going on. All right. So anyhow, enough about weapons. That's about it for the weapon effects. There's not a whole big list, and some of the other games have 1 or 2 little ditties about what the weapons do. Casting spell. Casting spells in combat, not a great idea. You want to be way in the back, because what can happen is your spell can be interrupted. And also, you're not allowed to move. You don't get to use. Let's see. You don't get to use your positive dexterity modifier. I'm pretty sure in this game. In this game you might be able to. Other games you don't get to use it because you're supposed to be standing there casting your spell with nothing else in your hands. If you're a cleric, you're supposed to have your holy symbol in your hand. So it's an involved thing. You want to make sure you're out of range when you're doing this. And generally, spells with instantaneous or permanent duration take effect right away. Other spells, they don't actually go off until the next round. A lot of times we forget to do that. Just saying, but that is canon. That's the way it's supposed to happen. One of the other things, going back to initiative, because this is important as far as spells are concerned, doesn't say so in this game, but in most of the old school Renaissance games, the rules are that before you roll the initiative die, you state your intention. This is what I'm going to do before you find out whether you won or lost initiative. So just kind of an important thing to remember. Because also, that can blow your spell. If it's a spellcaster in Lamentations, if they've been hit that round, they cannot cast a spell. In many of the games, you're assumed to have started to cast a spell, like as soon as the round starts, and if you get hit during your spell casting, not only is it ruined, you lost that spell slot. I'll talk more about that in the magic segment, but you're done. There is your spell is shot, so you've lost it. By the way, going back, I did forget to say one thing about attacking. There's a couple options. These are like heavy-duty combat options, so you might need to roll these down because it's crystalline. It's beautiful. There's a couple extra things you can do. You can parry. You can decide I'm not going to attack this round, and you can decide at the last minute if somebody's coming at you. Like your intention was to attack or cast a spell. Now you're like, oh man, this guy's going to kill me. You can parry as long as you have some kind of weapon to parry with, or something appropriate to parry with. So you forego your attack, and if you're not a fighter, you get a +2 to your armor class that round. If you are a fighter, you get a +4 to your armor class because you're better at parrying. You just know how to do that, which is a great segue into 2 things that only fighters can do. Elves and dwarves and Lamentations can do this as well. You can choose to press, which means you fight aggressively. What it boils down to, you get a +2 to all your attack rolls that round, but you take a -4 to your armor class. Same token. By the same token, you can decide to fight defensively, in which case you get a +2 to your armor class, but a -4 to all your hit rolls. So it's not not an even score. So you really want to do one of these things, and that's what happens. He does have a bunch of rules. Actually, I appreciate a bunch of rules that James put in Lamentations and Flame Princess for like odd things, like you want to change weapons and attack, we get a -2 penalty. Maybe you just didn't even have your weapon in your hand. You can attack that round, but you take a -2 to hit penalty. You can decide to hold your action, which is very standard. See and wait what somebody else does. But you don't get to act first. Whatever you do with them is instantaneous, or at the same time. That's a synonym, by the way. Let's see. Yeah, movement, blah, blah, blah. If you move, if you charge, you can do double damage to somebody if you're charging at them, but you suffer a -2 armor class penalty. Also, people can set their weapons against your charge, and they'll do double damage if they hit you. So that's not really a great idea. You can decide to use an item in a combat. I love what James did in this game. It takes 1d3 plus 1 rounds to get it ready if it's in a pouch. And if it's in your backpack, it's going to take 3d6 rounds to get it. So if you have your potion of healing in your backpack, or potion of giant strength, or whatever you decide you have, good luck getting at it once it's gone down. Not a good idea to be rifling through your pack when people are trying to kill you, as James said. So I love that. Oh, neat thing he did in this game. Not all OSR games have this, but you can always steal it. Aiming. If you're using a missile weapon, if you decide to take an entire round to do nothing but aim it, you get a +4 to hit. That's really, really cool. I like that quite a bit. That changes the game quite a bit. If you attack somebody from behind, you get a +2. And then also you figure let's kind of sneak attack when it comes right down to it. And of course, if you're a specialist, you put a couple pips in that skill. Next thing you know, now you've got a +4. And if you're stealthy, you roll a successful stealth roll. Of course, you get to do a sneak attack. So. Let's see. Cover is another modifier. A lot of stuff to cover here. It's incredible. If you have 25% cover, it's usually for like missile fire, that sort of thing, you get a +2 bonus to your armor class. 50% you get +4, 75% you get a +7, and 90% +10 to your armor class. Very hard to hit you at that point if you have a lot of cover. So you can use a terrain. Firing into melee with a missile weapon, pretty bad thing to do. Let's see. Pretty much you roll a die, whatever the appropriate size die is for the number of people there, and that's who you're going to attack. With your roll. If you're going to choose to aim for the entire round, let's see, one possible target counts as 2 people in that roll. So say there's 5 people involved in this big scrap, and you decide, well, I'm going to hit one of these bandits with my bow. Okay, well now 1 and 2 is going to be that bandit. And then say, if you roll 3, it's going to be the other bandit. If you roll 4, it's going to be the third bandit. If you roll 5 or 6, well, those are 2 party members in that scrap of those people, and you're going to hit them. And so you get to roll your attack roll, and there you have it. You don't get to add your dexterity modifier to your bow roll in case you have a great dexterity when you're shooting into melee. But then again, your targets don't get to add their dexterity modifier to their armor class either, because they're busy doing other things. Then there's all various rules covering helpless opponents. This is pretty standard. You can hit them for maximum damage. You can generally just dispatch them. Period. Rules for holy water, and pretty much anytime you have to do any kind of touch attack to somebody, and holy water would be one of them. You're pretty much going against your just unarmored, unless you have a dexterity modifier. So if you're throwing holy water at somebody, or trying to touch them to do some kind of shocking grasp spell, I suppose, or if a wight touches you and tries to drain your level, your armor doesn't count. They're just trying to touch you at that point. Let's see, if you're fighting opponents that you cannot see, you suffer a -6 in this game. It's usually, I think, it's like a -4. And let's see, missile attacks against unseen targets automatically or miss rather. There's also morale, and morale is a very interesting thing in the game. This is something I don't if you recall a character creation, depending on how much charisma you have, depending on this roll you make, and sometimes it's just based on your charisma, period. And limitations is based on a secret roll that the game master does when you hire a hireling or henchman or retainer. You find out what their morale is. In other games, it's just based on your charisma, period. But your charisma affects this. If there's a situation where your retainers or henchmen might book because combat's looking pretty bad, or if those bandits might book, like you've killed their leader, you've given them they've taken some losses, and as a game master, you're really not sure what they would do. You're always free as a game master to adjudicate what happens with that henchman or with these bandits. However, more so with the bandits than the henchmen. I think the henchmen you ought to make a roll. Okay, you roll morale. You roll 2d6. If you roll higher than morale, then they split. If something with a morale of 12 never quits, because you can't roll higher than the morale at that point. Then, oh wow, well, the video is getting super long because it is complicated. So in evasion and pursuit, when you decide you're going to book, if you want to chase the other person, you want to chase your bandits. Well, now say the bandits have a move of 9, and you have a move of 9. You both take 9. You roll 1d20. You add those together, and the highest one moves, or the highest one wins rather. You get to either escape your pursuers, or you get to overtake them. You can't map, you can't do any kind of record keeping when you're running. You can do something like dropping money or dropping food or dropping whatever, and that will prevent your attackers from it might prevent your attackers from continuing the chase. So if it's perhaps a monster, or if you drop like several zillion gold pieces, maybe the bandits will stop. I like what he's done with unarmored combat. that can be quite the bugbear in a lot of these games. Fists are just treated as normal minor weapons, doing 1d2 damage in this game. That's it. You can make them non-lethal if you really want to. And then wrestling, instead of these crazy grappling rules there used to be, it's pretty much just a contested roll, an opposed roll, d20 rolls. You add your attack bonus. Each person has their attack bonus, and they have their strength modifier. Highest roll wins. And then ties are decided by the dexterity modifier. I personally prefer to actually use both modifiers at once, so I'd rather that you add your strength modifier and your dexterity modifier and your attack bonus. That's my personal taste, because I think dexterity is just as important. Winner decides whether the loser is immobilized, and then they can attempt to disarm the loser at that point. Usually, attempting to disarm, the person has to roll a successful save versus, I believe, paralysis in order to keep whatever item you're trying to get from them. That sort of thing. And generally, if you're immobilized, you can't take any action. And if there's multiple people trying to grapple somebody, then generally you get to add +1 to that. And that's pretty much it. That's all that combat is. Everything else is narration and adjudication and theater of the mind and approximate ranges and that sort of thing. It is not a beautiful crystalline structure. It is however you decide it is. It can be crazy. It can be organized. And it's generally very, very fast. It can be tactical. You can always throw in extra modifiers as a game master anytime you want to, and just rule that, okay, well, this situation gives you a +1 or +2 to hit, or you should be able to get away from this guy easier, or you should be able to surprise him more easily. Maybe you'll get 11 and 12 chance because you set up such a great ambush. It's entirely up to you at that point, as long as you're consistent, fair, above board. You guys talk about it, but that's all there is to it. It is not that hard to run a combat. It's very different than new D&D. Not knocking it, but that is a very involved system, and this is not. This is very easy, fun, and fast. Not so fun for the losers, though.